Okay.
I wanted to try.
Hello, everybody. So it's DJ and Cy, and as we promised, we're here to talk about Stairway to Heaven. And we've just recently watched this clip of Jimmy Page talking about the making of Stairway to Heaven. So we're going to take a little while just to talk about how Stairway to Heaven came about and to have our different perspectives. So obviously you've got me, this guy, talking from a more amateur fan perspective. And then we've got Cy, who's more of a music professional who'll be able to break it down a little bit more deeply and a bit more technically. So Stairway to Heaven was obviously written by Jimmy Page, Led Zeppelin, and they went on a music retreat to a stately home called Heaton Grange. And Jimmy, when he's talking about the creation of this particular song, he talked about how he wanted to create a composition that started with a very fragile and spacious guitar piece. And he actually mentioned one of his influences being Bach, J.S. Bach, and the Bach Bourrée. And then as the piece unfolds and the journey continues, he was talking about how he wanted to build layer upon layer upon layer as the journey unfolds and the soundscape begins to open up. And one thing he mentioned is that he broke the cardinal rule of music composition. And the cardinal rule is that you don't change your tempo. Many musicians, and Cy would probably be able to tell us more about this, when you're learning music and music performance, often you will learn with a metronome, which keeps you exactly on the very same tempo throughout the entire piece. But Jimmy Page wanted to kind of buck that trend and break the rules. And if you listen to the entire 11-minute song, you'll notice that by the end of the song, the tempo is much faster and much more urgent than it is at the start. So the piece unfolds, and with each new chapter, with each new layer within the song, you start to build a momentum and build a depth, and it's very moving. And you'll notice that John Bonham doesn't come through on his drums until halfway through the song. Again, so unusual. Halfway through the song, then the drums come in. And another unusual and striking part of the whole piece, the whole composition, is the build-up to the solo. So obviously with Cy being a lead guitarist, you'll be able to tell us more about this. And also with Cy being versed in music theory, and he'll be able to tell us the few bars before the solo as a non-technical musician. I just have to feel the varying changes in the beats in that preparation, so that when it's kind of like a fanfare in preparation for the solo. So when the solo hits, it takes off and it soars, and it builds even further towards the end when Robert Plant's vocals really reach that screaming pace as we move on down the winding road. So, Cy, I'm going to hand over to you, because I'd love to get your expert opinion as you break down the song from a music professional's perspective.
Yeah. What's up, David? Yeah. Well, the song is generally in A minor, which is not very uncommon for a classic rock song to be. You generally have keys of E minor and E flat minor. E flat minor basically, because it's just a little bit more easier for some singers to hit that pitch, and you generally just roll it down with your tuning. You just tune to E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, B flat, and E flat, and so on. But here, Page has stuck to A minor, and he's kept it rather simple. So, being in A minor, he's just playing his regular diatonic chords, nothing too fancy, nothing too out of the box or out of the ordinary, until he puts in an augmented chord, which is something very rare in how would you call it, as popular rock music, because augmented chords tend to grab a lot of attention. And while it's used a lot in jazz, I mean, it's augmented chords are no strangers to jazz, but in something as commercially oriented as this track is, it's beautiful how they manage to have an augmented chord and still move along very beautifully. So I'll just like to touch upon that part. So when you have the verses going, when she gets there, she knows if the stores are all closed, that's where we have the chords going from A minor, which is the root of the composition, and it goes on to the fifth, goes to E. But the beauty here is it goes to E augmented instead of E dominant seventh. So the notes he's using is E, he's using E, G sharp, and C. Now, what's interesting about this is it's so brilliantly done that when he uses E, G sharp, and C, being an augmented chord, the chords notes are going to be the same for each of these three chords. That is, if he were to play it in C, or in G sharp, or in E, the notes would turn out to be the same. So what it allows him to do is get some beautiful voice leading going. So when the phrases goes from when she gets there, she knows if the stores are all closed, it goes from E augmented to C to D. So ideally what he's doing, he's just going from C to D. While he's going A minor, E augmented, which is E, G sharp, and C. Going to C major, that's C, E, G. And then going to D, he's going to D minor after that, which is, D, F, A. So he's able to transition absolutely smoothly across with this augmented chord in there as well. And it's not even noticeable. It adds a beautiful color, but not jarring at all. So I think it's an excellent way of moving in a chord progression which is so ethereal. It's probably the last chord you'd expect to have in there. Other than that, the song follows a traditional 1-4-5 system. It's in the key of A minor and goes along naturally, so to speak. Goes from F to G to A minor. Does a backdoor entry, which is very famous in Latin music as well. They go a lot from they do a lot of these backdoor entries. So nothing too fancy beyond that. Like the song's structured regularly, and there's not much going on until, as David mentioned, until like the solo part comes in, where they up the tempo, and instead of counting in 4/4, that is 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4, the counting in the build up goes to 3 it goes to 3-3-2. So you're instead of counting like ta 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 ta, you're counting ta 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 dun 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 dun, and then comes the solo, right? So yeah, that part. Yes, yes, he's going
Yeah,
1 2 3
that's
1 2
so
1 2
so
3 1
difficult to
2 3
follow.
1 2. Yeah. So it goes like 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2, and then like comes the solo. So they've kind of worked on the tempo there, and they've increased it there. The thing is, having someone like John Bonham, who's such a tight drummer, they're able to do it spontaneously and on the spot. Uh, Ideally, like you use this in classical music and in jazz, a lot in jazz, actually, a lot in modern jazz, you tend to use this, that you tend to give a fraction. I hope I'm not getting very technical, but you tend to use a fraction, that is, if you're using, say, for example, a quarter note going at 100 beats per minute. So now if I am to increase my tempo, I would go to 125 BPM. And why would I do that? Why would I choose that specific number? If I were to increase, I would do that because that's 1/4 of a quarter note. So I'm like adding 1/16 note. And so the tempo increases, but the relative tempo of the overall song is still the same. So it feels coherent. But Led Zeppelin here are not doing that. They are increasing tempo and breaking the laws in exactly the way that Jimmy Page says it. So having Joe, that's also one of the other things with having such camaraderie and band chemistry, that you're able to pull off such unusual feats rather easily. Having John Bonham do that, all they do is just follow him as he increases his tempo. And since they're so well synced together, it seems absolutely seamless and seems absolutely smooth without having to do these complex calculations, if you will. So, yeah, those are the
Fantastic.
most fascinating points of the song. The solos turns out pretty smoothly. It's in the regular pentatonic scale, nothing too crazy. And so, yeah, it's got
Well,
a.
you could say that.
I mean, that's
I've
I'm just breaking down the
I've
system.
tried.
I mean, it's a
I'm sure.
fascinating solo. Like it's fascinated, all of us, like for generations. But but I'm just saying that the actual, the actual so-called theory behind it is rather simple, and he's just used this genius to sculpt something so beautiful and so ethereal out of something so simple. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's what I have to say about it.
I think it's generally considered um, in rock history and in that um, community as being the greatest and best song in the world, as it
I would
was
totally
loved
agree.
by Tenacious
I know,
D.
yeah.
Exactly,
There's
it
not a
should
lot
be.
of people who will disagree with that. I would think.
That's right. In fact, we watched another version, another cover by Heart at that tribute at the Kennedy Center, and beautifully enough, the drummer was actually Jason Bonham, John Bonham's son. So it was beautiful to be, to have that moment when this was obviously a surprise to Led Zeppelin, and Robert Plant was up in the audience, and they had a they had a beautiful connection. They were hitting their hearts and pointing at each other, and towards the end of the song, Jason Bonham, when it gets to the culmination, and the singer, whose name you'll probably know from Heart, says that final "Buying a Stairway to Heaven," and you notice that Jason Bonham looks up into the heavens as though he's just connecting with his father. It's just so touching. The whole thing was so beautifully moving. One of the most incredible versions. And then finally, when all of the performers come out on stage, Jack Black comes out because he obviously was one of the biggest fans, and you could tell how moved and how proud he was to be on stage, and giving that tribute to the original members.
Yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about next. We're going to be talking about Heart.
Yeah.
And Heart's These Dreams, so that we introduce the band Heart. For those who don't know, it's an excellent girl band from the 80s, very close to my heart, and David's heart as well. So it's something we'll be talking about in the next video. And then in the video after that is when we talk
beautiful.
about
We'll definitely do that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, talking over you then.
Yeah. So yeah, the video that David's talking about is what we're going to be analyzing in our third edition of this podcast series. It's after Heart's These Dreams. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So David,
Right,
I'd like to
talk about that.
I'd like to ask you, as someone, I don't know, I'd like to ask you something, David. So as someone as someone who grew up a little bit later after the release of the album, but as someone who grew up at the time, because I'm like I didn't grow up in the rock and roll era. Like I grew up when in the early 2000s, when music was much different. So how was it for you? Like what did Led Zeppelin mean while you were growing up? Like when you were in the early 80s, or even the late 70s? Yeah, like how do you hear about them? What was the overall feeling like around the band, around
You're
Stairway?
quite right. So I was born in 1974, so around about this time. So I have my eldest brother, my oldest brother, who's 10 years older than me. This was his era. So I really looked up to him because he was kind of the cool one of the family. So he had the hair, and he had that really rebellious, stick it to the man 70s rock, that whole feeling, with the Who and the Stones, Led Zeppelin, with Pink Floyd. So that real proper old school, 70s rock. And when I was growing up, that was just kind of fading out, and it was, as we talked about before, hair metal.
Hair metal, I love it. Absolutely love it.
That's. I think that's probably your era. You've got the hair, you've got the the leopard skin, and that's the era that I was growing up. But I really kind of got into music when it was more grunge. So me and my mates at school, we were all skateboarders. So we were kind of, even like punk, grunge, and that sort of, era of the 90s with Nirvana. But having said that, because of my absolute love of guitar, I still was so drawn to the guitarists, the heavy rock guitarists, the really intricate guitarists, the Claptons, Jimi Hendrix, obviously David Gilmour. In fact, we discussed that maybe in one of our later conversations, we'll discuss my favorite band of all time, a band called All About Eve. And when David Gilmour left Pink Floyd, he didn't play with anybody apart from one band, and he went and played with All About Eve. And
you mean after Roger Waters left? You mean after Roger Waters left? Yeah.
Exactly right. Exactly. And again, as a song with a musical ear, especially for a classical, beautiful, you can almost hear the trained guitarist in the band, even though they were kind of a goth rock band around about that 80s sort of vibe, a bit alternative, around the time that the Sundays and Morrissey but yeah, I really was drawn to the beautiful guitar pieces in the rock songs, and the chord changes, so creative. So yeah, maybe that's a conversation for a later podcast. But when it comes to the absolute classic guitarists and the classic bands, you can't go past Jimmy Page, Led Zeppelin, Dave Gilmour, Pink Floyd, even the Beatles when it comes to songwriting and creative chord changes. But yeah, I think it's the guitarist Eric Clapton's, Jimmy Page. I think for you, with when it came to hair metal, it would be Slash and Guns N' Roses.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah,
would that be fair?
Yeah. It's Slash from Guns N' Roses, and yeah. I was into all of 80s. It didn't matter. It was Def Leppard, Guns N' Roses, Poison, just about every band from the 80s. I loved all of it. I just swallowed all of it. Yeah. So yeah, we're going to be talking about all of these in our upcoming episodes. We're going to break down, one era at a time and a band at a time and a song at a time. And yeah, we're going to be having a lot of fun. Yeah.
Can't wait for it. All right, so I think we've got to 21 minutes there. So I think that's probably a good time to maybe sign off, and we can prepare for our next podcast, whenever that might be. So this is the start of a whole series, and let's see where it goes.
Awesome. Okay, signing off.
All right then, my friends. Take care, Si. Speak to you again
Bye.
soon. Bye for now.